we go to our next talk, which is going to be by our speaker, Dr. Love Kochkave from Kolkata. He's a director of Netralayam and the executive director at BB Foundation and director at the SLR Eye and Retinal Surgeons. He has extensive experience in handling complex and challenging surgeries and good academic contribution. He'll be talking on managing 6 nerve palsies. Over to you, Dr. Love.
Thank you so much. And thank you, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
So I would be speaking on 6 nerve palsy, and so one important thing is that this is the most frequently involved cranial nerve palsy because of the long and tortuous course, and as it's located in the peripheral part of the nerve near the clivus as it enters the cavernous sinus. So any kind of elevated intracranial pressure from any cause may lead to a 6 nerve palsy. Etiology wise, as you see, as we all know, in adults, the most common is the microvasculopathies and related to hypertension, diabetes, and the other causes may be infections like Lyme's disease, arachnoiditis, trauma. Any kind of trauma may lead to a 6 nerve palsy, neoplasm, and other causes like giant cell arteritis. But in children, again, the most common cause is viral infection. So etiology wise, when an adult presents with a 6 nerve palsy, first thing we look for is the diabetes and hypertension. And in children, we ask for history of fever. Other causes could be, again, trauma, neoplasm, and elevated intracranial pressure. So as Dr. Randhir had mentioned, in 6 nerve palsy, because the overaction of the medial rectus, it is causes uncrossed diplopia, and it is worse in the direction of the palsied muscle. Suppose, for example, if there is a right 6 nerve palsy, then when the patient sees towards the right side, then the diplopia worsens. And the face turn would be towards the right side because of the overaction of the medial rectus. So the patient maintains a right gaze to avoid the double vision. And esotropia in these cases are mainly due to unopposed action of the medial rectus muscle. There is limitation of abduction of the affected eye. And as in all other paralytic squints, secondary deviation would be more than the primary deviation. So just a case scenario in which we can see this is a right 6 nerve palsy. Now, again, important is how do we differentiate between a partial 6 nerve and a complete 6 nerve palsy? And this is, again, very important in adult cases. Most of the times, in a partial 6 nerve palsy, the eye may be able to go beyond the midline, but if there is contraction of the medial rectus, then that may not be there. But in complete 6 nerve palsy, in no situation it goes beyond the midline. Fourth generation test will be reduced in partial 6 nerve palsy, but absent in a complete 6 nerve palsy. Similarly, for duction test, unless there is a contraction of the medial rectus, both the cases there will be no restriction. Saccades partial will generate, but the complete one will not generate. Investigations, again, in adults, first important investigation is the routine blood test, the blood glucose levels, and ESR. If that is normal, and if you are thinking of neuroimaging, then the patients in which, especially if they present young, again, if this was discussed earlier also, in young presentation, it is better to do neuroimaging. If it is associated with other cranial nerves, that is again important. Association with pain, we have to do it. If it is a bilateral 6th nerve, it's always better to do a neuroimaging. And if it is associated with optic nerve edema or cancer. And what we do is with contrast. This is very important. How do we differentiate a unilateral lateral rectus palsy with the different other presentations like congenital fibrosis syndrome? Again, congenital fibrosis syndrome can be a bilateral, but the differentiating point will be the force duction test, which will show restriction. In Duane's is one of the common differential diagnosis. In this, in primary gaze in Duane's, the esotropia will be less when compared to a lateral rectus palsy. Most important is the retraction of the eyeball on medial gaze. And once we do a force duction test, sometimes it may give a paradoxical result. Graves ophthalmopathy, again, the history of thyroid will be there, and this can cause abduction deficit also due to the thickened medial rectus muscle. Entrapment of medial rectus is another differential diagnosis in which there will be a history. Obviously, the history of trauma will be there. Post-duction test is again differentiating factor, and neuroimaging will show entrapment of the medial rectus. When we differentiate this with myasthenia, most important point is the fluctuating, the readings will not always be the same and may be associated with ptosis. Strabismus is variable, and then finally the diagnostic tests will confirm the diagnosis. Other differential diagnosis would be excessive lateral rectus recession for squint, that is post-squint surgery, or a disinsertion or slippage of the lateral rectus. Again, in this case, history is there. History will be present. In case of bilateral lateral rectus palsy, the most common differential diagnosis would be the infantile ET, and most often it is infantile ET rather than a bilateral lateral rectus palsy in infants. And how do we differentiate this? When we cover one of the eyes, there will be a clear abduction movement.
It's 7 o'clock.
And in the doll's eye movement, that will elicit abduction. Horizontal gaze palsies, again, lack of ability to generate binocular, saccadic, and pursuit movements to some eccentric orbital position, and abnormal head posture will persist on monocular occlusion. Graves ophthalmopathy, again, the history of thyroid will be there, and force duction tests. Now, coming to management, in children up to age of 4 years, the aim is to prevent amblyopia and preserve binocular fusion as far as possible. And most of the times, because it is a self-limiting condition, alternate occlusion will help both in preventing the diplopia and to prevent secondary contracture of the medial rectus. But for small deviations, we can give base out Fresnel prisms. And if the child loses binocularity, sometimes if it is a prolonged sixth nerve palsy, then chemo denervation of the antagonist medial rectus may be tried. Similarly, in adults, if it is associated with hypertension or diabetes, first 6 months we just observe, and the important instruction to the patient is to control their general health parameters so that recovery can be better. And during that period, again, we can do alternate eye occlusion. What I tell my patients is that when they are indoors, then occlude the normal eye. And when they are outdoors, then occlude the affected eye, because then chances of bumping into objects and accident would be there. So for that time period, we can try alternate occlusion. But when surgery, suppose if it is persisting for more than 6 months, then we have to correct the concomitant ESO deviation by surgery to improve the abduction and increase the size of the centration of diplopia-free binocular field. That is, we aim for diplopia-free vision in the primary gaze. And as for any other squint surgery, FDT is a must when we are planning a surgery. Now, coming to the surgical planning, depending on whether it is a partial or a complete third nerve palsy, if it is up to 20 prism diopters of deviation, then we can, the choice is either only lateral rectus, the lateral rectus resection is done. If there is a coexisting medial rectus contracture, which we will know with force reduction test, then medial rectus recession along with lateral rectus resection. And if it is more than 40 prisms, then the contralateral medial rectus recession along with RNR. Now, in partial, there are various, in total, the 6-nerve palsy, there are various transposition procedures available in which we can have a partial or complete transposition of the superior and inferior rectus, or muscle union procedures like Jensen's procedure. Complications, again, use vertical deviation, anterior segment ischemia, say if there are more than 3 muscles involved, and undercorrection and overcorrection. Role of, one thing we have always debated, role of botulinum toxin for the for lateral rectus palsy, and sometimes botulinum toxin actually helps when we inject in the medial rectus muscle to prevent contraction, and it allows operation of only 2 rectus muscles, decreasing the risk of anterior segment ischemia. But again, for practical purposes, there may be other problems associated with the botulinum toxin, as if the toxin leaks to other muscles. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Love. That was very precise and complete. I'll just ask one small question before Jyoti takes over. You did talk about botulinum toxin, but you said seem to combine it during surgery. Non-resolving 6-nerve palsy, would you think of using Botox as a temporary measure?
Temporary measure, logically speaking, in the initial first 6 months, it may help. But when surgery is required and we have crossed 6 months period, then I don't think Botox will help. Then it has to be a pure surgery.
So in the waiting period before, like the patient comes and it's not a diabetic and it's a young patient, would you give botulinum toxin to them? Say within a month if the patient is reported?
That was my question.
Practically speaking, I don't know.
We do. It can be done in the outpatient by just lifting up the medial rectus and injecting under it around 2.5 to 5 international units of Botox. It's usually practiced by strabismus squint specialists.
Right. I've also given, and I've seen that in the initial, especially when we know it's not a diabetic, because in those cases it tends to resolve very easily. But if it is not, if you give it, it tends to help in early resolution, especially in young post-trauma, can be tried.
Yes.
One other question, Dr. Sujata, I want to know, in cases where we know a very frank DRS, obviously we know there's a retraction and we can easily differentiate between a 6-nerve and a DRS. But in case where we don't have a frank retraction happening, is there some other signs that we can look at to figure out if this patient is a 6-nerve or not?
You can have down shoots which may be associated. You can have the force reduction test, which may be a little force generation test, which may be a little different from that of the lateral rectus paresis. Plus, definitely palpebral feature changes are quite prominent. Plus, the angle which you have in DRS is usually small. If you see the abduction limitation versus the angle of deviation does not correlate. So if you have an abduction limitation of -3 or 4, you will actually expect in a lateral rectus paresis to have an angle which is large, 30, 40 prisms or so. In DRS, surprisingly, contradictorily, it is not so high. So it's a small angle with a large abduction that gives a pointer.
Yes, I think that's a very good point to say. Yeah, Dr. Rashman.
The most important thing is in advanced retraction, they won't have diplopia, no? That itself is differentiating.
Yes. Yeah, they tend to have a face turn, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Rashman.
Yeah, so just wanted to add 2 more points from the exam point of view for this. There are 2 regions during the course of 6-nerve where it is in proximity with the 7th nerve. One is in the pons, the nuclei are together, and second is at CP angle. The way you can differentiate by clinical examination at these 2 locations is that if there's a lesion in the pons where the nuclei are involved, then with the 7th nerve, there'll be gaze palsy because the 6th nerve nucleus with PPRF acts as a gaze center. It controls the gaze to the same side. In CP angle tumor, 6th and 7th both can go, but the other eye adduction will be normal. You may find nystagmus in the other eye because if there is a concomitant involvement of cerebellum as well, then you will find that adduction is normal, but there is a nystagmus.
Dr. Prem, one question. What would be your management if you have a multiple cranial nerve involvement? Right? We discuss individually, but if you have a patient with having 3rd, 4th, 6th, or combination, how would you go about for the students?
That's a real challenge. That's a difficult situation to try to control. I think a combination of selective Botox to particular muscles as well as prisms is usually my way to do it. Surgically, it's very challenging to try to have a good field of single binocular vision in those patients with multiple cranial nerve palsy. And as Rashmin just mentioned, don't forget 5 and 7. Those patients often may have a neurotrophic cornea as well. And so you need to be very careful in ensuring that that is protected.
And one question regarding prisms, you mentioned what sort of prisms would you give and which kind of palsies would you advise prisms?
So I tend to use the temporary prism, the Fresnel prism, so that it can be adjusted very easily. And it's often putting prism onto the normal eye that works a little bit better to try to shift it toward where the paretic eye is sitting. And so 4th, it's hard, as was mentioned earlier, because of the torsion, it's hard to correct that. But with 3rd or 6th, with an appropriately obliquely placed prism, I've found that that can be very helpful. And again, that's why the temporary prism is helpful.
Yeah. Just to mention what Dr. Prem is talking are the Fresnel's prism. These are stick-on prisms that you get just for the postgraduate, which you can stick onto the glasses and you can peel them off whenever you want.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Jaspreet, right.
Shall we go on to our...
Dr. Chitramanu, Dr. Jaspreet wants to say something. Yeah.
I just want to add on, in children, when you see a 6th nerve palsy, I mean, it's very important to rule out a slow-growing tumors. Imaging is a must. And the other thing is history of vaccination. You have viral 6th nerve palsy as well. So this is very important when you're dealing with children with 6th nerve palsies.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Chitra.